Real-time strategy. It's an underappreciated genre, and it's usually not done that well on consoles. But in case you don't know, real-time strategy games are very similar to any other basic genre, whether that be action-adventure, first-person shooter, or whatever. In most of those games, you're using a controller, and the controller usually only manages a single character. But imagine that you're not just controlling one character, you're controlling thousands. In this case, the dynamics of the game change completely. You're left with having to use a whole lot more of your mind than you generally would with a first-person shooter. First-person shooter is probably about as far opposite you can go to real-time strategy because it's more about hand-eye coordination and physiological response, right? It's about your reaction time and your skill playing the game and responding to situations within very, very small micro units of time. With real-time strategy, it's a little bit different because you're usually making both those kinds of decisions at certain moments, but more often you're making much longer term decisions. And I really love real-time strategy games. They are so different, first of all, and at the time that I think they were introduced with games like Dune, and then later into the 1990s we had a huge explosion of them with Age of Empires and StarCraft and Total Annihilation, Command and Conquer, as many people know. When I was playing a lot of RTSs on PC back whenever I was about 10 or 12 years old, my parents were pretty happy with it because of a lot of the things that it was teaching. Especially in the case of Age of Empires, you learn things about how economics works. You learn about supply and demand. You learn about making systems more efficient. Actual non-renewable resources, all kinds of really, really deep stuff at the end of the day, right? So that's one of the things that I really love about it. Real-time strategy games, in a nutshell, demonstrate a lot of larger problems to other games. Let me give you an example. In a real-time strategy game, generally what you're going to do is you're going to base build. You will have objectives to obtain. Most of the time those objectives revolve around world domination and things like that. You always have a map. That map usually has limited resources that multiple players are forced to compete over. In the future with games, when you go out and you try to create huge, vast game worlds, right? We're huge into open world games these days, and we can learn a lot about how to design those games from real-time strategy games. So whether you're controlling one character or whether you're controlling thousands, and then in that case we refer to them as units, it doesn't really matter. A lot of the same design principles still apply in a lot of these instances. I was surprised to find out that with RTS, there's a lot of white papers that have been written on how to create ideal artificial intelligence for strategy games. Because for a strategy game, artificial intelligence to be really good, it shouldn't necessarily always beat the player. What it should do is it should challenge the player so that they can learn and they can get better. Preferably, it should feel like you're playing another human being. And doing that, as it turns out, has been especially tricky. And it's only in recent years that some huge advances in computer science have even enabled the possibility that this could happen in strategy games. But unfortunately, the genre is not quite what it was in the 1990s. We don't have a whole lot of strategy games that come out these days that sell 20 or even 10 million copies for a single title. And from that standpoint, it makes developing them a little more difficult, and it makes innovating in the genre a lot more challenging. And to create games that are really going to do bold, giant, large-scale new things, you'll need a lot of revenue. You'll need a lot of players playing that game. You'll need a huge base and lots of ways to gather that information together. So what's going to happen with RTS in the future? Well, I see a few things happening. One, you'll have strategy games that get a lot more large scale, and that will mean that the units that you're using in the game will be much more autonomous. It will be much more about directing these huge masses of units, moving around thousands of those units. You'll have big giant armies of thousands of different vehicles and characters colliding with each other in huge epic battles. Why is that going to happen? Because all players love seeing that. All players love seeing huge giant waves clashing at each other, and admittedly it is kind of an epic sight. The computer players in real-time strategy games are going to get a lot more advanced, and they're going to feel a lot more like playing human beings. And indeed, for indie developers, this is going to be very positive news because it will mean that for much less money and much less time invested, you will have structures and systems out there that will enable you to have a single player experience which is still very, very enjoyable and still very dynamic and can offer new experiences periodically to players. You're going to see a lot more strategy games get released. We're going to be much more interested in which of these games introduces something new and interesting, as well as those that provide the most visually compelling experience, I think. I think the popularity of StarCraft 2 is very, very good because it means that real-time strategy games are still very much capable of being in the mainstream for gamers, and the fact that there's competitive play and there's championships where you compete for hundreds of thousands of dollars in certain places with StarCraft 2, I mean, wow, that's exciting, and that's something that might be fun for maybe you watching to get into as well. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe if you liked the video and you want to see more here on Digicades about real-time strategy games. I'll see you next time. Better cover up this Nintendo logo so that Nintendo can't sue me.